So I'm going to talk about now the school of Asha'ri and the Asha'rite school of kalam. Um, so Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, who died in 935, was actually Mu'tazilite. And in his period, there started to be, um, among the Mu'tazilites, sufficient problems that people started breaking away from the Mu'tazilites. And to sort of give you an anecdote of one problem. Um, I'll give you the example that was raised of three brothers. Three brothers. One brother is good, was dies, and of course goes to heaven. This is the Mu'tazilite worldview, right? Rewards. He does good. He's rewarded. Goes to heaven. A second brother, he's wicked. He dies, and of course, according to the Mu'tazilites, he goes to hell. Now there's a third brother. He dies when he's an infant, and so he's in purgatory. This is what happens if you die an infant. You're neither in heaven nor hell. You're kind of in this in-between state. So the brother in heaven's, who's in heaven, sees an angel and complains, how is it that my little brother never even had the chance to do good and go to heaven? The answer that when a Mu'tazilite is raised this question, the famous Mu'tazilite Abu Hudayl, he says that, look, God is all-knowing. So he knows, his answer is he knows that infant would have grown up to be a sinner. And so God took him before that, out of his generosity. But then, of course, the voice comes down from comes up from the third brother in hell, says, what about me? How come if he knew that about the little brother, how come he didn't protect me? So these are the kinds of problems that come up for the Mu'tazilites that the Asha'rites are going to have different responses to, and there are other theological groups as well, but the Asha'rites are the most important of the others. And the other thing I should mention in the opening is that the Asha'rites view themselves as defending the Hadith tradition people and the Hadiths by arguing with the Mu'tazilites. So in other words, using kalam to defend the Hadith-oriented. In other words, the Hadith-oriented were were under attack by the Mu'tazilites. Remember, I mentioned the anthropomorphism, for example, of the Hadith describing God as having a body. So the Ash'rites come along and they're gonna defend the Hadith-oriented people and say all of it is true. If a Hadith is authentic and the Isnad is good, it's true. If God says that in the Quran that he's got a hand, he's got a hand, and they're going to defend it using reason. Now, an interesting side note is that the Hadith folk, the Hadith transmitting types, did not want this defense. They were against the use of reason and human reason to interfere with, they wanted to stick with Quran and Hadith. So it's a funny dynamic of you have the Ash'rites who are, would come up and defend the Hanbalites, but the Hanbalites did not accept the Ash'rites' defense. So there you have it. So let's launch right in with the metaphysics once again. And as for the Mu'tazilites, you have God and everything else. And as for the Mu'tazilites, God is characterized by unicity. That is, there's one and only one, and they resist the idea that God has, that God is one and only one. They do want to resist the idea that God has pieces, but they do go further with the attributes, as I'll mention in the next slide. And the other thing is, as the Mu'tazilites are known as the advocates of unity and justice, I'll mention at the outset that the Ash'arites are going to emphasize God's power. Of course, for them, God is also just, but their real commitment is to making sure that you understand God, and God alone has all the qadr, all the power. And the third thing I'll just say is the sort of a framing as part of the frame is that one of the concepts that they're going to invoke is this concept of bila kaif, without asking how. So remember, I told you for the Mu'tazilites, the world up there, that is the sort of sense of reason that God employs and the sense of reason that we can employ is the same reason. That 1 + 1 = 2 for God, just as it does for us. Yeah, for the Asha'rites, not so fast. And what they're going to say is we, as humans, being limited, cannot fully understand the way that divinity works. And for all kinds of questions that you might want to ask, the real answer is, but we can't know. But that case literally means without asking how. So we know something, for example, that God mentions in the Quran, but we don't understand exactly how it works. Because the rules up there for God, him being all powerful, he being all powerful, are not the same as the rules for us, who are created, limited, weak, and flawed. So this is one major difference. So just like with the Mu'tazilites, God has different attributes. He has these attributes of essence. He's all powerful. He's all knowing. He's all just. He's living eternally. I should have mentioned in the previous, God is eternal for the Asha'rites, of course, just as for the Asha'rites, just as for the Mu'tazilites. The difference is that for the Asha'rites, God also has what they refer to as attributes of act, such as hearing, seeing, speaking, being merciful. There are more, but we know this because God tells us in the Quran that He sees and that He hears and that He speaks. Indeed, the Quran is God's speech, so He must be speaking. They're not troubled by the problem of the plurality of eternals that the Mu'tazilites are. They simply say that we can't understand the nature of God's hearing or seeing, in the sense that we don't know if He sees and hears like we do. We don't know if He has ears. We don't know if He has eyes, or the Quran refers to Him as having a hand. So then we know He does have a hand. The Quran tells us this. Are God's hands like our hands? That we do not know. Because, again, what's true for God and the way things work up there is not the same as how it works down here, and our knowledge as humans is limited. So we just can't know those kinds of things. But we know what we can know based on revelation and the tradition, that is the Quran and Hadith. So there's a lot more of just kind of acceptance and I guess the positive way to put this is it's a conservative view of how to read texts versus one that assumes that human reason must play a fundamental part. God is, as for the Mu'tazilites, completely just, but what the Ash'arites mean by justice is quite different. What they say that justice is simply what God's commanded what God commanded is just. God's prohibitions are wicked. In other words, He prohibits the wicked things and He commands the good things. We know it's just by the fact that He commanded it. That's how we know what's good or just. It has nothing to do with the consequences of what comes from obeying or disobeying. That's a separate matter. It's good to obey God and wicked to disobey, but we only know that because He told us that. And moreover, God is not bound of any particular consequences from your obeying Him or disobeying Him, because that would limit God's power, and God is all-powerful. So, in principle, it's perfectly possible that you can be good and obey God, and He could send you to hell. And conversely, and this is what's I like about the Asha'rites, it's possible to be completely wicked and be sent to heaven. So, now it seems unlikely that God would act in such a way, but it's possible. So there's really no, it's probably unwise and not entirely rational to if you think you're being good, be really cocky about what comes next, because really God can do whatever He wants, being all powerful. That's the Asha'ri position. So justice is the commandment, are God's commandments, and what's wicked or what God prohibited. That's what God deemed. That's what God deemed it so, and God, being all powerful, has the capacity to do that. And as for the everything else in the universe, there are like for the Mu'tazilites, atoms and accidents, but a slightly different definition of atoms. The first part is the same. Each one is like every other one, and they take up space. But, and here's the crucial difference, unlike for the Mu'tazilites, the atoms do not perdure over time. They are constantly they are in each instant being created with their accidents. God is the direct cause of everything all the time. And when I say all the time, even that is misleading. What we mean by all the time is in each instant that he deems it necessary. He does it. In other words, things have no ontology, no kind of existence apart from His creation in the moment. So that seems strange, right? I mean, I seem to be here over time. I mean, I'm finishing the sentence that I started. That's an illusion. I mean, that's a misappreciation of what's actually happening, according to the Asha'rites. What's really happening is that for a number of moments in a row, God is creating me here in this chair, sitting in front of the microphone. Each syllable, the computer, myself, Portland, where the city, the accident of the city I happen to be sitting in, the accident of the chair under me, everything, the whole constellation is being created moment by moment. In the next moment, it could all be gone. Poof. God could just decide to take a break, and I'm gone, and the sentence is never completed. So I don't carry around any qadar to do anything. God is constantly creating me and the qadar, Qadar again, qadar, the power to make me saying that thing, to make in other words, the accident of vocal cords resonating in a certain way, the accident of a thought, all of that is, just kind of being created moment by moment. So, for example, if you were to pick up a pencil, and so what is that? Well, it's a cluster of atoms, right? And a bunch of accidents adhering in it, like the accident of being wooden, maybe it being yellow, of having the capacity to make marks on paper, etc. Maybe it's cool, the capacity of being cool, the accident of being held in your hand. All these accidents, and it's all there, but only for each instant. Now, if you were to drop that pencil, remember, for the Mu'tazilites, the reason the pencil is falling is because you decided to drop it. You had you caused it to fall in a certain sense, using your power to drop. Well, and the direction it dropped is down, and that's because for the Asha'rites, just to make it clear, what's making it drop is not gravity. To be clear, what's making it drop is God in each instant is creating the accident of it being slightly below where it was in the instant previous. God is sort of creating it in a sort of series of freeze frames, one below the next. Now, you could take that pencil and drop it or let it go and think it's going to fall, but the next time, in principle, God could make it float or make it go up or just have it disappear. I mean, the whole thing is in God's control because, and here's the main point that the Asha'rites want to emphasize, God alone has the qadar. He is doing it all the time. So for the Mu'tazilites, remember, 1 + 1 = 2, down here and up there. It's the same rules. For the Asha'rites, 1 plus 1 can equal anything God wants. I mean, there are Asha'rite mathematicians in the Middle Ages who would, after solving a problem, say, if God wills. In other words, there's a certain humility. In other words, 1 plus 1 equals 2 if God wills it. Because there's a certain sense that it's God who sort of ultimately determines what the truth is, and we are just somewhat in the dark, doing the best we can, but really not knowing. So, thus the Asha'rite physical theory. So this physical theory does bear on ethics, that is, determining the determination of right and wrong. On the surface, it would seem that Asha'rites have a bit of a problem in that if human reason is not really part of the equation, and we are not responsible, or put it another way, we do not create our actions because God creates everything. You might think, how can there even be a ethical theory? In other words, first of all, for knowing what right and wrong is, well, that is clear in a sense. We know that God, what God commands is good, because God tells us it's good, as well as being just. We know that what God prohibits is bad and wicked, and that's that. God could have made murder good if he had commanded it, and he could have made fasting during Ramadan bad if he had commanded it, but he didn't. And God does not lie. So if he says something, the nature of his speech is that it's true. Now that's thus right and wrong. But how are we to understand the fact that we don't have, that God is creating all the actions, as it were? How can we then? How is it fair, I guess is the way, to put it simply, if God is the one who's in a sense creating the murder when we murder, he's creating the fact that I'm murdering as an accident, then why am I being punished for it? Well, the Ash'rite answer to this is that there are different types of acts. There's voluntary and involuntary acts. An involuntary act is something like shivering when you're cold. So in a certain way, that's autonomous, and there's no kind of volition involved. Whereas murder or acts that involve ethics like that, there is a volition involved. Now, it's true that I don't have the power to do it or not do it. God created me doing it in that moment, but he also created that volition in me to do it. And so in a certain way, that volition and choice is part of the act, even if I don't walk around with the power to not do it. So that's the way that they handle that question. So a person does not have qadr over his actions, but he does have the capacity to do or not do them in that moment, as well as the volition in that moment when God made them that way. He made them wanting to do it, or he made them choosing to do it. It's better. So if we can go through the same questions that I asked for regarding the Mu'tazilite answers, let's go through the Ash'arite answers. What is sin? Well, sin is simply what God forbade. In other words, the prohibitions as mentioned by God in the Quran and through the Prophet in the tradition, in the Hadith literature. Why would someone sin? Well, in a physical sense, according to their physical theory, God's creating them sinning. Now, he's not happy about it, but he's happy that, for example, the sinful acts themselves are sinful because he made them that way. In other words, he's not happy that someone's committing a murder, but he's happy that murder is a crime. That's explicitly one of the ways that the Ash'arites answer that question. What is the Quran? The Quran is God's speech. It is an eternal attribute of God. That is, it is God speaking. Thus, as an attribute of God, it is uncreated. So in that line of God and everything else, the Quran is very much divine in the sense of it being really an aspect of God. So when you're hearing the Quran, you're hearing a sort of created reflection of something that is in fact in its origins uncreated, God's speech. As you might imagine, they're none too happy with the idea of the Mu'tazilite description of God as atoms and accidents, which seems to them an unflattering and erroneous description of the Quran. What is God's justice and his power, and is he capable of sending infants to hell? Is he capable of lying? Again, God's justice is his commandments, just as his sin is his prohibitions. His power is unlimited. He can do whatever he wants, and thus, yes, he is capable of sending infants to hell. He is, however, not capable of lying, just for the same reason as the Mu'tazilites. It's considered a logical absurdity. And also, he says he tells the truth in the Quran. So, in other words, again, lying is taken as not as something you can do, but as something that's broken of the way of it's kind of a broken speech, just like a chair can be broken, speech can be broken, and that break is lying. Do humans have free will? In what respects are we responsible for our choices? Well, in the sense that do humans have qadr? Do they have power over their actions? Then the answer is no for the Asha'rites, because God alone has all the qadr. We are responsible in the sense for our choices only in the sense that God creates us that way as it pertains to certain types of actions, that is voluntary actions, that is actions that have some sort of choice built into them. So God's creating them with a choice and creating us choosing it to go in one way or another. So thus the Asha'rites. And just to finish up, as to the question of how do these theological debates play into more recent strands of Islam, or to the classical tradition for that matter, because you have these sort of theological schools, but separate from the legal schools, separate from the other, we've talked about different ways of dividing things up. And just to give a very quick answer, the Mu'tazilites ended up being extremely influential, in particular, for certain types of Shiites. So both Twelver Shiites and Zaydi Shiites. So different types of Shiites took up the Mu'tazilism. Ash'arism ended up being assimilated into Sunnism, which eventually stopped the kalam proper, but some of the ideas and notions, such as the uncreated Quran and a very strict sense of God's power and God's unicity, became an aspect, and of course the importance of tradition not just as a rhetorical point, as part of the tradition, became important in Sunnism. It's not quite that simple, but I think I'm going to leave it there. There are modern examples of Mu'tazilism in, for example, Kurdistan today, that a colleague of mine has recently been studying. But I think I'm going to leave it there for the content. But I wanted to, for your discussion section, for something a little bit different, discussion group, I'm going to post a video of a couple of contemporary scholars who I had an occasion to sit with and read with. And I'm not going to tell you where they are because I don't want to tip off. Well, actually, I will tell you that. They're in Yemen. So my question to you is, after listening to their discussion, they're going to be discussing a theological point, and the teacher is, the way that it works in the society is, I think I mentioned before, with tradition, the student reads the text to the teacher, and then the teacher comments, and there's all kinds of different styles of commentary, different types of comments, but what characterizes this tradition in Yemen is debate. So the student is actually interrogating and analyzing one of these points and disagreeing with the teacher, and they kind of have a bit of a back and forth. So the teacher is really upholding the view of the school, And so my question to you is, which school is it? Is it more like the Mu'tazilite school or the Ash'rite school, based on what you've heard? And it's not an easy question to answer, because they're not arguing one of the points I brought up. But I'm just curious to see if you could put it together, if you could kind of link some of the things I talked about with the direction that the teacher goes in his argument to figure out which school he's up to. So that's all. Thank you.